Hi, hello, VinnyEndDragon here, and welcome to another video. Today, I wanted to discuss something interesting. I wanted to discuss the biggest glow-ups in competitive Pokemon history. Now, Pokemon's existed for a long time in various different formats. However, the sort of criteria for this list was just Pokemon that were absolutely bad upon release or had been bad for a few years, just getting a complete revelation upon a new generation. New regional forms often add new moves, new abilities, new anything that sort of recontextualizes the competitive Pokemon format, and sometimes that'll make a Pokemon that's been really bad for a long time really good. But before I get into it, first, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 200 subs soon, and I really appreciate you guys helping me get there. The growth in the channel has just been phenomenal, and I want to keep the train going. Alright, now first up for the honorable mentions section, I have a group of Pokemon to talk about, because these Pokemon all didn't really glow up themselves, but they received a really good Mega Pokemon, which inherently made all these really bad Pokemon incredibly viable. In Gen 6, the following Pokemon received Megas that just completely recontextualized their entire existence: Kangaskhan, Mawile, Lopunny, and Charizard. Now, there were really broken Pokemon that also got Megas, like Mega Ray, but those Pokemon weren't bad beforehand, so I don't know if I really wanted to include them necessarily. So these were the four that I really wanted to discuss. Now, it's pretty simple to understand why these glow-ups happened if you just look at their stats and look at their abilities. I mean, Kangaskhan, Mawile, Lopunny, and Charizard all received the Mega Stat Boost, which is 100 points, overall increasing their stats from mid to overall pretty solid. And then they also received really strong competitive abilities. Kangaskhan having access to Gen 6 Parental Bond made it absolutely one of the most destructive meta-relevant Mega Pokemon. Mega Mawile having access to Huge Power to double its attack stat. Lopunny getting access to Scrappy made it stronger in pretty much every singles format. And Charizard getting access to Drought made it strong in both singles and doubles, and completely recontextualized Charizard, whose last good generation was really Gen 1. Next up, I have a few more honorable mentions to get to. These Pokemon were bad, I should say, for not as long, but I still feel like they were interesting to talk about. The first of these Pokemon being Superior. Now, Superior has definitely been good for a long time, however, Power Creep has kind of caught up to it. But back in Gen 5, it actually was pretty good. With access to Contrary and Leaf Storm, that's all you really need. So why is it in this video? Well, in every generation, there is a few month span where starters just don't have access to their hidden abilities. It's a little weird, the distribution of starter hidden abilities, and they don't really seem to do it anymore, but Superior for a couple months of competitive play just did not have access to Contrary, and you could only really use Overgrow. The distribution of Superior's hidden ability, however, made it completely rise overnight. And we could also say the same for our next Pokemon, Incineroar. Incineroar getting access to Intimidate started the ball on what became the strongest Pokemon of all time. There's a comment to be made that the buff to Incineroar's hidden ability, having access to Intimidate, was the first in a long array of snowballing that made Incineroar the most broken Pokemon of all time. I mean, Incineroar's hidden ability is the very first buff. This just began to snowball into what we see now in Gen 9 Incineroar. Whether that's a good thing is really up to you. Next up, we have access to Moltres. Now, Moltres has been consistently kind of mid for the first few generations. I mean, it wasn't exactly bad in Gen 1. I mean, no Pokemon with that stat pool would be bad in Gen 1. However, sort of Gen 2, Gen 3, and then especially Gen 4, it sort of fell off, especially with the introduction of Stealth Rocks, as well as just the introduction of stronger Pokemon. It always lived in Zapdos' shadow, and was still better than Articuno, but that wasn't saying much. However, they've slowly buffed it since Generation 5, which meant that it had less of an immediate glow-up and more of a slow improvement. Access to Flame Body as a hidden ability in Gen 5 would give it an absolute niche that the other ones didn't have, and then access to Heavy Duty Boots in Gen 8 also sort of recontextualized this Pokemon. But anyway, enough with the honorable mentions, let's get into the list. Before I get into the list though, please make sure to like and subscribe. A lot of people who watch these videos just aren't subscribed at all, and I really appreciate it. When Pokemon Champions comes out, I'm going to be making a ton of Pokemon content, so I really appreciate you guys sticking around for it and help boom the channel as much as possible, so thank you guys so much for tuning in. Anyway, let's get back in the video. For my number 5 slot in this video, I actually went with Weezing. Weezing received the glow up in 2 forms. First of all, there's just its second form, Weezing Galar. Weezing Galar with access to neutralizing gas and a pretty interesting stat spread and access to the fairy type meant that it was absolutely going to receive a ton more love than Weezing. Plus, a fun thing about Weezing Galar is it's one of the non-legendary Surge Pokemon. That means that it has access to its own Misty Terrain. Now, Misty Terrain is one of the few terrains that setting up doesn't inherently matter. It has less synergy than Psychic Terrain as well as Electric Terrain, but overall it's still helpful. However, base Weezing getting access to neutralizing gas was definitely an improvement. Now, Weezing getting access to neutralizing gas made it a very interesting gimmick Pokemon. Now, I know that sounds weird because it's overall pretty solid in terms of stats and there's no real gimmicks on it, but neutralizing gas helped enable a lot of really broken things. There's also just the fun interaction at the start of Scarlet Violet and where it nullified Proto abilities, which is how Wolfie managed to win a tournament with this. But you also have stuff like, oh, it neutralizes Slacking and it neutralizes Regigigas. Just fun little gimmicks like that, which is why Weezing's gonna forever see gimmick use in VGC. And then in singles, having access to 3 really good abilities, or in this case 2 and then a third one on Galar, means that Weezing's just gonna have a ton of utility for a long time, and it's gonna have its own specific niche that only really it could do. Ability suppression without having to click something like Gastro Acid is absolutely helpful, and is gonna make it see use for a long time. Overall, neutralizing gas was just such a helpful addition that made this Pokemon that was bad since Generation 1 see a ton of usage. Next up, I have another Pokemon from Generation 1, and that is Clefable. Now, Clefable has been in the game since Generation 1, and in its introduction generation, it was fine. It was solid. Being a normal type with access to a bunch of utility moves kinda just meant it was worse Snorlax. You weren't ever really going to do that much with Clefable, but it had some interesting stuff. However, fast forward to Generation 6 and Clefable has definitely fallen off. It doesn't really do anything, it has no specific niche, overall just nothing to really write home about. Even its hidden abilities in Generation 5 didn't save it. However, getting access to the Fairy type in Generation 6 made this thing a completely different Pokemon. Nowadays, having access to Unaware Clef, Magic Guard Clef, as well as just leftovers and wish support and all this stuff has made Clefable an absolute monster. While Clefable isn't exactly OU in the current generation and the most dominant threat, it's still absolutely worth acknowledging as a strong Pokemon. For the past few generations, it's been consistently good, pretty much since its buff in Gen 6. One of the strongest defensive / support pieces you can find in singles, and being a defensive fairy, it's one of the few things that could just stop clicking a Draco. I mean, absolutely getting the fairy type made its defensive synergies so much better. You have access to just Moonblast to just throw out, which means this thing can't be passive. Overall, Clefable's buff in Generation 6 was one of the best ones I've ever seen. And Clefable's going to be consistently good so long as the fairy type is the best type in the game. Next up, I have Zamazenta Crowned. Zamazenta Crowned's glow up is really fascinating. In fact, Wolfie VGC made a video about it that you could watch here. He goes far more in depth than I'm planning on going into this video, however, I will summarize his arguments for you. Zamazenta Crowned, even after the ability and base stat nerf, still had one buff that made it absolutely a threat in Generation 9. That was access to Body Press. That made Zamazenta Crown one of the worst restricteds into one of the best restricteds, just completely overnight. With the release of Gen 10, having access to all the things that could help destroy all the meta-relevant threats made Zamazenta an absolute plus, going from one of the worst restricteds to one of the best. Pretty much Body Press was just the thing that it absolutely needed, as it could do consistent damage now, can help break through Intimidate users. Dauntless Shield just makes this thing absolutely ridiculous to get rid of. You get access to all the best moves, stuff like close combat if you don't want to click body press, if you're maybe in singles potentially. You get access to play rough, you get access to heavy slam because Behemoth Bash is just worse than heavy slam. And overall, Samazenta Crowned is absolutely a problem threat to get rid of. Overall, I have it this high because even though it was only bad for one generation, it was undeniably in VGC the worst restricted Pokemon. One of the worst a box art legendary has been in a long time. And after this body press gain, it absolutely shot up into, yeah, regular box art legendary status. Next up, I have Articuno. Articuno is a Pokemon that has existed since literally Generation 1, and it has been bad for almost all of that time. Articuno has seen absolutely no real competitive play for almost the entirety of its lifespan. An absolute flop of a release. However, Generation 9 actually added a lot for it, and that's just sort of the glow up of the ice type. However, that's a video for its own situation. Articuno with access to snow gives it a defense boost and an evasion boost, which means that Articuno's actually pretty difficult to get rid of. Plus you get access to screens, tailwind, access to freeze dry. Articuno actually has a lot that's been adding over the course of the previous generations. Plus, if you're in singles, it gets access to the heavy duty boots that were introduced in Gen 8, which is the reason why Moltres sort of had a glow up. However, the combination of the meta at the time and access to the increased boosts from snow made Articuno finally win tournaments after its introduction all the way back in Gen 1. Now, was it an ultra dominant serious threat? No. However, this glow up for Articuno and making it an actually usable Pokemon was already really interesting. Articuno's glow up has been very fascinating to see, and I'm very interested to see what Gen 10 ice types look like. I really hope that ice type could become one of the more prominent threats because of all the changes to snow, all of the changes to its offensive interactions with things like freeze dry, and overall I'm just very happy with the new ice type. Let's see what the new ice type megas look like in ZA. We have one more Pokemon glow up to discuss, and it honestly might be the most boring one to discuss. However, it absolutely is one that's worth talking about. Let's talk about Ditto. Now, why did Ditto have the greatest glow up in Pokemon history? Well, it's quite simple. Limber versus Imposter. Limber is the Pokemon ability where the Pokemon can't be paralyzed, and gaining that ability while you're paralyzed is able to cure it. That's the exact definition from Pokemon Showdown. This ability is fine. Not really all that strong, but not really all that bad. It's fine. However, when you look at Ditto's stats, it's absolutely not worth talking about. Getting paralyzed on a 48 speed doesn't really matter. I mean, this base stat total is completely abysmal. You can't do anything behind it. However, its move pool is even worse. The only move you get access to is Transform. You're gonna be lucky if you even get a Transform off because, again, Ditto's stats are terrible. With 48s in your defense and HP, you're not living any attack. But then if you click Focus Sash, then you just die to the second attack. You're only copying every stat except for your speed, which means you're guaranteed to move second. But then if you have access to a Choice Scarf and then you use Transform, then you're still getting hit twice, which means that you're probably dying depending on the Pokemon. However, Imposter completely changes the math up. By being able to switch instantly and holding a Choice Scarf, you're able to threaten everything, and I mean everything. Both in singles and in doubles, this thing instantly went to one of the strongest gimmick Pokemon of all time. In restricted formats, you see Ditto having access to just Imposter Transform, which means you have access to 3 restricteds on your team depending on the situation. It can help completely shut down things like Miraidon and Fluttermane, all the fast, frail special attackers that can one-shot anything, including themselves. Ditto can help break stall things by just copying boosted Pokemon and then just punching holes. Ditto getting access to Imposter was just a complete revelation for the Pokemon, bar none. Easily one of the best glow-ups in Pokemon history. But what was your favorite glow-up? Make sure to comment down below, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. I kind of want to do more sort of short video essays like this, so please be sure to subscribe and like and tune into all of them. Also, make sure to join the Discord server for Vinny's Toad School tournament, as I ask a lot of questions like these in the Discord. With that, I really appreciate you guys watching the video. Get out of here.